So the Gemara actually begins right at the top of the Amud, Chavav Man Aleph, and I said we had double Yom Tov. One was for Queen Victoria, one was for Shavuos, right? Kabbalas Torah and Kabbalas Al Malchus. I don't know which is first. Probably a drush there somewhere. So the Gemara talked about the Brisa lists different items, different events that one should do kriya for, and you can't sew it up. In other words, it can never be completely sewn up, as if to say it was never ripped. You'll see it can be based, it can be kind of put together in a way that's not permanent or is really clear that it was a rip. But in the same way, if you have that good pair of pants and you sit on something, you remember you sit on a nail and you took it back to the tailor and they would do what's called invisible stitching, right? Invisible mending, right? Or today you sew it on the seam. I don't know. I have a tallis in the middle of the tallis wears out right here, and so I took it to a seamstress and she kind of just sewed it down. You can see it. It's probably not Misachim. But so what is it? So the Bryce at the top of the page said one is Korel Avi V'Imo. When you do Kriya, I'm just reading from the top of the page before we go to our Gemara. When your parent passes away and you do Kriya, that can never be sewn up. Rabbo Shlim the Torah, if your Rebbe teaches you Torah, can never sew it up. Nasi Vav Beisdin, the Nasi Vav Beisdin, which is a communal sadness for the Jewish people. Shmuel's Rose, this is real bad news, right? People do Kriya for hearing terrible things. I don't know, financial losses, personal losses, ship that goes down, right? Ship that goes down and didn't have insurance in those days. Birchas Hashem, or hearing God's name cursed, right? And the Gemara is going to talk about that. Sefer Torah Shenisraf, a Sefer Torah that's burnt, right? And including, you see the cities of Yehuda and the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim, and it's still destroyed. But Korea al Mikdash Mosiv al Yerushalayim, and the Mishnah Brisa says that you do Kriya for seeing the Beis HaMikdash, and then for seeing the Beis HaMikdash, and then you do an additional Kriya, you extend it for seeing Yerushalayim as well. Usually they go together, so you don't have to do an additional Kriya, you simply add onto it one from the Beis HaMikdash to Yerushalayim.
This is the source of our minhag today, right? To do Kriya when you go to
the Kotel. So this is not just the Kotel. This talks about Makom HaMikdash is the Kotel, right? But also talks about Arei Yehuda, which would be a city like Hebron.
But what he's saying here is that
and Yerushalayim.
But what he's saying here is that Kriya, you can never sew it back up again.
Correct. That's what he's saying. Okay, right?
Okay.
So, right, less people in Noheg do Kriya today. I don't know.
Rabbi, it's just Kriya. There's no sitting Shiva or anything.
Well, it depends. For a parent, it's sitting Shiva.
For parents, yeah.
I'm saying for all the others. For Rabbo, it's like one day, so it's an hour when you go for the funeral. But and Nasi Nav Basin. But all of these is really about the sense of Kriya that becomes a permanent Kriya that can never be eradicated, no matter how much time has passed afterwards. That's the Chiddush here. And the Gemara therefore goes through each one of these different items. It's really a piece of Gemara about Kriya and the sources for it. The first piece of Gemara that went through, which was we had done last time, was how do you know that you have to rip Kriya? About for parent we don't go through because that's all the stuff we've done about Avelis. But what about for your Rebbe? How do you know that you have to do Kriya for the Rebbe that taught you Torah? So the Gemara tries to find an analogy in Elisha ripping Kriya when Eliyahu goes up and is taken up on the chariot. And in fact, it says it says that he took his garments. Elisha took his garments and ripped them into two. So the Gemara understands, first of all, from the statement of Elisha, when Eliyahu goes up into heaven, he says, "Avi, Avi, Rechav Yisrael Parashav." So the Gemara learns out from that statement where Elisha says, "My father, the chariot of Israel and its parashav, its chariot keepers, or the right." So Aviv is father and mother. Rechav Yisrael parashav, the chariot of Israel, are the teachers who lead us along. Okay. and the Gemara gives a whole long drush into what that is. And the fact that he rips Kriya, the fact that you have Kriya on that is because Elisha ripped his garments. It says right there in the event, he rips his garments as he realized Elisha will never come back, he believes that he's gone, right? Seeing a person go up in a chariot means he ain't coming back like that, and you can't do it up. You can't re-sew it because it says by chazek b'vgadav by karem l'shnayim. He ripped them into two. Why does that say ripped them into two? It means they will always be two. The rip will never be mended. Even though when you do a rip, you always never think of ripping the garment into two, but it means whatever was ripped and separated can never be brought together. So that's the Gemara learned about why a person does Kriya for the loss of his teacher. And the Gemara had one final question, and then we'll come to a Gemara we're going to do now. But Eliyahu, of course, is not dead. Eliyahu is alive. He comes back to the bris, he comes back to the Sidorim, etc., etc. The Gemara's answer is, yeah, but for Elisha, he was dead. Okay? So in other words, you're not ripping Kriya, you're ripping Kriya for the loss. You're not ripping Kriya for what the soul and the body. That's applicable to parents. But the loss of your teacher, who is now separated, even if he happens to be physically alive in a different kind of dimension, is still considered he's dead. Right? It's like the story of Herschel Estropalia, who was the great poor, but always was a comic, and he was told, and he would go around schnorr meals. So he was told, you went to one person, you'd never get a meal from this guy, right? And because every poor person he invited, he'd put down food, and the balabas would engage him in conversation, so that he would talk, and the poor person couldn't eat, and then the waiter would come and take the food away for the next course. This was like a mean trait. So people went in, they thought they'd get like a schnorr meal, and they ended up with nothing. So Herschel Estropalia, who was well known as a court jester and everything, says, I'll fix this guy. So he goes in, the fellow begins conversation, he says, you know this Moshe from this town? He says, there's gestorben. So he says, another guy, there's gestorben. There's auch gestorben. So finally the guy says, all these people are gestorben. So Herschel says, when he ches, the ganze Welt gestorben. Okay? And of course he got his meal. At any rate, we'll go to the next piece of Gemara. The next piece of Gemara is about Nasi v'Av Beitin. Nasi v'Av Beitin Shmot wrote Minalan. How do you know that when a Nasi and a Beitin pass away, that you rip Kriya, and Shmot wrote are serious bad news. So this is about the death of Shaul and Yonatan when they were killed by the Plishtim, and the news comes back to David. This is the beginning of Shmuel Bet. That's where David comes into power, and it's introduced by finding out about the news of how Shaul, and of course the death of Shaul is a very difficult halachic discussion, because Shaul of course commits suicide, right? Or it's assisted suicide really, because
he fell on his sword.
He fell on his sword, correct, but he couldn't have fallen on the sword unless the sword bearer had assisted him. So it's actually a source for assisted suicide. Okay, for the sword bearer not for Shaul, for the sword bearer who's really assisting Shaul in his own death. Because that's really what the doctors do. They don't like the term assisted suicide, they like the term assisted death. Okay, the doctor sets up the machine, right, and the patient presses the button.
Is that how it's done?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
They can't. They're not allowed based upon their Hippocratic oath. They can't kill directly.
They can't do anything.
So they can line up the IV, put all the things in place, and they say you press this button, and then all of the stuff follows in. Okay. At any rate, so that's the story of Shaul. And when David hears about the death of Shaul and death of Yonasan, his sons, so it says, "Vaychazek David bivgadav vayikarem." He took his garment and he ripped it. V'gam kol anashim asher ito, and all the people who were with David when they heard about the death of Shaul, vayispedu, vayivku, vayatzumu ad arev. They gave eulogies, they cried, they fasted till the evening. We see, by the way, it's only one day of mourning. Al Shaul v'al Yonatan beno, v'alam Hashem v'al BAYT Yisrael kinaflu b'chorav. They mourn for Shaul, Yonatan, the Jewish people, and BAYT Yisrael. So each of these items now becomes transposed into the Gemara's limud for about Nasi and Av Beistin. They're taking Melech and making the analogy into a Nasi. It's obviously very different, but to some extent, because a king has a certain Davidic, actually Shaul is not Davidic, has a certain lineage, correct? A certain significance, but the Nasi played that role in the second base of Mikdash, in the second temple times. So says the Gemara, Shaul Zen Nasi. Death of Shaul is like the death of a Nasi. Yonatan was his assistant, not really true, of course. He was his crown prince. Ze Av Beitin. Alam Hashem v'al Beit Yisrael, for the death of the people of God and the Jewish people. Elu Shmod Ros. These are the bad tidings that come. That really was. That was a terrible thing. Correct.
The whole country the whole army was destroyed.
Correct. Right. It was a very low point, and then they need to start rebuilding. So this becomes the drash. How do you know that for the death of a Nasi and Avbeit and Shmod Road one does Kriya? So the Gemara says, the Gemara just plays with the drash now. It's really a drash Gemara. Amalei Rav Bar Shva Rav Kahana. So the question is, Ve'ema Adahave Kulu. Maybe you only do Kriya when all of these items happen together. The Nasi plus the Avbeitin plus Shmod Road. Not A or B or C, but A and B and C. So the Gemara says, yeah, but look at the pasuk. There's a lot of breaks. It says, Al Avial Hifsik. It says, Al Shaul Vial Yonatan Beno Vial Lam Hashem Vial Beit Yisrael. So if you wanted to say you needed all of them, it would be one event. Al Shaul Beno Beit Yisrael. The fact that it separates, it means each one alone would have been sufficient to do Kriya. Okay, it's more of a remez than a drash. So Hifsik Inyan. Umi Karin Shmod wrote, do you really do Kriya for hearing bad news? We'll give you an example of a real bad news story that people didn't do Kriya. V'amrulei l'Shmuel, they told Shmuel, Katar Shvar Malka, Trace Alpha Yudai B'mzigat Kesari, V'lokara. So there was a story where they told Shaul that Shvar Malka, King Shapur, I think it's Shapur 1 or 2, killed 12,000 Jews in Mzigat Kesari. This is a terrible number, right? The king, the Persian king, the Parthian king, killed 12,000 Jews, and Shmuel didn't do Kriya. So you see that for bad news, you don't do Kriya. So Gemara's response is, it only happens when the majority of the people are killed. 12,000 is a significant number, but compared to the Jewry that existed in the Persian Empire at that point, under King Shapur, who enjoyed relative quiet, not just relative, very good quiet, where we lived in a government that was very supportive of them. You know, whatever happened, you'll see in a moment what happened, you have to put into context. This was not the majority of the people, this was a single event, and it was therefore the case of Shaul, right, with the Shmod Road was not Shaul and his son, but was the loss of all these people. It was a low point in Jewish history. The Plishtim had taken over. The Jews were on the run. So the setting is much different. So that's what it says. Lo'ama brov tzibur, when they were killed in the battlefield with Shaul, that was a serious loss. 12,000 Jews sounds like a lot. Is a lot. Blood is not cheap. But you see in a moment where you have to put it in perspective. So therefore, lo'ama brov tzibur k'maaseh shahaya. Now the Gemara is a historical question. King Shapur, Shmor Malcha, as he's called in the Gemara, appears in many different agados. He converses with Talmidei Chachamim. He's very respectful of Jewish traditions, and you get the feeling here's a person who, is a friend. So
what's he doing, killing 12,000?
What's he killing 12,000? Correct. And not only that, but here's an example of a story that shows how friendly he was. So the Gemara says, "Mi katal Shvar Malka Yudai." The Shvar Malka ever really killed Jews? If you're Amalei Shvar Malka l'Shmuel, Shvar Malka said to Shmuel, he has a relationship with Shmuel. He said, "Teisile." Believe me, or so to speak, it is lo katli yudai me olam. I never killed a Jew in my life. That's actually a fairly significant statement in the ancient world. It says, look at me, I'm the greatest king. I never ever killed a Jew. For a king, you can kill anybody. So the Gemara says he made the statement. Shmuel accepts it, and yet 12,000 Jews suddenly got chopped off. So the Gemara says, Hassam, the case of this Mezigat Kesari, was a actual revolt. They revolted against the king. We don't really have any information about this event. But the Gemara assumes that they basically brought it upon themselves. They acted treasonously. For whatever the reasons are, they revolted, they rebelled. So obviously what do you expect the king to do? But it's down to revolt. Right? But it's not that he was unhappy with the Jews, not that he changed. He was very happy with the Jews. He just had some 12,000 hotheads, so 12,000 people got wrapped up in some kind of radical revolt. They thought they could take off the yoke of King Shapur, and that's what happened to themselves. Gemara says, Hasam there in Mizigat Kesari, Inu Garmalam Shayu, they caused it to themselves. The Amal Rav Ami, that Rav Ami had, there was a statement that Rav Ami made, and it said almost like in code. L'kol Yetari de Mizigat Kesari, because of the sound of the harp strings in Mizigat Kesari, this is the place we're just talking about where 12,000 got killed. Paka Shura de Lutkaya, the gate of Lutkaya got broken off, was knocked off. That was because they were singing. This was like a call to battle. I don't know how you call people to battle with harps. Think more of trumpets, right? But whatever, or means it was celebration. It may have been celebratory. The first battle they threw out the soldiers because of the celebratory harp strings in Mizigat Kesari. The gates of Lutkaya were knocked down. The king came in and wiped everybody out. So you see that Shmuel Malka was really a friend of the Jews. Yes, if you revolted against them, he had to take you out. And B, Shmuel wrote, this was not considered Shmuel wrote for Shmuel because he understood this was an isolated incident that did not impact upon Rov Tzibur. The case with the Plishtim and Shaul and the battlefield was obviously the exact opposite. So the Gemara's proof or support or remez or hint about Shmuel wrote, you do Kriya, is saved and stands. Okay? Now Shmuel wrote, of course, a very relative thing. Right? I mean, how much money do you have to lose for it to be Shmuel wrote? Right? What does the stock market have to go down? Well, or go up, right? By the stock market, you don't really own probably. It's phantom money.
Well,
It's paper money, so it's only worth it when you cash in the stocks.
correct.
Right. But if you invested and you cash them in and lose, yes, it's bad news. All right. So that's Shmot Rod and Nasi and BAYT. Next one, Al Birkas Hashem. Okay, this is about cursing God. Minalan. Dichsiv, it says this is about which king is this? Chizkiah is the king who hears it. This is about
Eliakim son of Chilkiyahu.
yeah, okay, who is a Pergichet?
No, that's from 19. First puzzle.
Welcome 19? Right. Okay. Yes. So no, this is Rav Shakeh. Rav Shakeh is a turncoat. Rav Shakeh is, I believe, a Jewish turncoat, and becomes like a Meshumad, and joins Ashur, and he gets up to curse Hashem. It was like a psychological kind of thing. Vayamod Rav Shakeh Vaikar B'Kol Gadol Yehudis. He speaks or maybe he's not a turncoat, maybe he's one of the Syrians. He speaks in Hebrew. Vayidaber Vayomer Shimu Dvar Melech HaGadol Melech Ashur. Listen to what Ashur says. This is Ashur attacking Chizkiah. This is when Chizkiah, by the way, is almost destroyed, and miraculously overnight, right? The enemy evaporates. There's some kind of, they get here, they hear things, and they run away. Okay, it's one of the things that's mentioned, by the way, in Vayi B'Chatzi Alayla.
Right.
Okay.
Archaeologists think that it was the Nubians from southern Sudan.
Who scared them off?
Scared him away.
Could be. So he gets up to say, Kol Mar Melech, Al Yasil Lachem Chizkiah. Don't rely upon Chizkiah. Ki lo yichal latzil etchem yado. He can't save you from their hand. Yal Yaftach etchem Chizkiah ala Hashem lemar. Don't trust that Chizkiah can trust upon Hashem to say Hatzil Yatzilenu Hashem V'lo tinaseinu tirazot b'yad Melech Ashur, that God won't hand this over to Melech Ashur. Don't believe it. Al tishmal Chizkiah ki chomer Melech Ashur asu iti bracha v'yetzu v'elai v'ichlu ishkafnu v'shtenato. Come to me and I'll take good care of you. And goes on and goes on, because if you don't, because you've been turned away to say God is going to save you, which of course is not true, is not true, is not true, is not true. So the people hear this, and he's broadcasting this, and he goes on. Who each other God saved them from me? That your God, Hashem, and he obviously uses God's name, is going to save Jerusalem. And the people listen, and they don't respond. They've been commanded and told not to engage this guy in conversation, because he's a very, very good speaker. Okay. And they hear it, and they come now to tell Chizkiyahu what they say. And that's the pasuk says, Vayavo El Yokim and Chilkiah Asher al BAYT, that El Yokim and Chilkiah, who is in charge of I think the Beis Hamikdash, or the king's house maybe, V'shev Nasofer V'yoach ben Asaf Hamaskir El Chizkiyahu Krui Begadim. They come with ripped clothing, and they come to tell Divrei Rav Shakeh. And when Chizkiyahu hears this, he rips his clothing, and he goes into Beis Hamikdash. And then Hashem says, don't worry, blah, 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 blah. Chizkiyahu davens, and then of course it turns around. But the point of it all, when they hear this guy speaking, they rip their clothing. Why do they rip their clothing? Because he's cursing God. Because he's using God's name inappropriately. Because he's bad-mouthing God. That's what it means, cursing God. And when Chizkiyahu hears what he said, he also rips his clothing. So the Gemara says, what's the source for Birkas Hashem, which is cursing God? Minalan d'chsev, vayivol Yokim and Chilkiyahu shel habayit v'shev nasofer v'yoch ben Yehosaf hamaskir el Chizkiyahu kroi begadim. Okay? So they come already ripped clothing. So the Gemara learns from this, Tan Rabbanan, Echad HaShomea v'Echad HaShomea mipi HaShomea chayav lekroa. A person who hears it directly, the person blaspheming, and the person that hears it from the person who heard it. Because they come to Chizkiyahu and they say, this is what Rav Shakeh said, and they quote him verbatim. What does Chizkiyahu do? He rips the clothing. He didn't hear it directly. He's only getting the news second hand. The witnesses who transmit and bring the news the second time, right? They say it over. It could be like in a Beis Din. It's not going to be in the case of Rav Shakeh, but it could be, for example, if there's a blasphemer in town and they come to the Beis Din to testify, and they record exactly what they heard. The witnesses don't need to do Kriya again, because every time you hear it, okay, this is a new blaspheming of Hashem, so they don't need to do it again. Shekvar Karo B'Shah Shel Shamu. They already ripped Kriya. Right, so the Gemara says, okay, well that makes sense, but does it really make sense? So the Gemara says, B'shal sheshamu mai have, hakashamai hash. The Gemara says, but okay, so they heard it then, but they're hearing it now. So why don't they rip Kriya? So the Gemara says, well, I'll show it to you. D'chsev vayhi kishma melech Chizkiyahu vayikrat begadav habegadav. That the pasuk says when Chizkiyahu hears it, he rips his clothing. What's the clear pshat? Hamelech kara v'heim lo kara.
Absolutely.
Right. The king ripped his garments. It doesn't say the king and the people there ripped their garments again. Right. They're coming because they heard it and they're bringing the news. The purpose of their telling the king is to testify exactly what happened. Right. So if you repeat it for not a purpose to testify, then you have to do Kriya. But here only the king does Kriya. So now the Gemara says, so this is the source why you rip Kriya for Birkas Hashem. V'lo misachim. How do you know you can't sew it up? So we know they rip Kriya. It's black on white in the pasuk. How do you? Maybe they just sewed it up afterwards. So the Gemara says, Asya Kriya. So this drush about Kriya, the Gemara says, is not clear what they're learning it from. They're learning it from one of the previous things that are mentioned about ripping Kriya. Right? So and Tosa says, if they can learn it from the others, why do you need anything? Right? Anything.
It sounds like
any Kriya is going to be there. So, but which one exactly they're learning it from is not clear. Which previous drasha that they're associating it with. Okay, Rashi says Asya Kriya. So there are actually two versions in Rashi. I'm not sure what your Gemaras look like. If you look on the fourth line of Rashi, okay, it depends on how. I don't know what Steinsaltz even has, but it's Rashi it's a very short Rashi. It says Asya Kara Kara.
Yeah.
Kara, that's our Gemara. So in my Gemara it has a parentheses star midavid end parentheses. Okay, and then the star that's in the parentheses puts you on the side to Elisha.
Right.
So you know it's not even clear which version of Rashi is arguing. Do you learn it from the fact that Elisha ripped Kriya for his loss of his teacher, or do you learn it from and you couldn't sew it up because it says Vayikara l'shnayim, which means it remains two forever, or do you learn it from David, who ripped Kriya for the loss of Shaul and Yonatan and BAYT Yisrael?
But did it say he couldn't put it back?
So it doesn't say. Correct. It doesn't say there that he couldn't sew it up.
But again, I'm still not clear. I apologize again. As another part of the city, but the Ata Kriya.
That tells me that the same way the previous example of Kriya you couldn't sew, so this Vayikra you can't sew as well.
I guess the question they say is why did they have to bring in this whole thing with Chizkiyahu then and all that? To learn because of the Shem, you mean?
Because of Shem, right? Because there's a listing of different events that you do Kriya for that are not mourning events.
Right, but
they're not family mourning events.
This is where we learn the Birkat Hashem part, but the Kriya part we could say we learned somewhere else.
Correct, because it doesn't say he ripped it up or not. It doesn't say he re-sewed it or didn't re-sewed it.
This business of re-sewing.
Yes.
The prohibition is wearing the re-sewn clothes or sewing it up?
I believe sewing it up. I don't think the prohibition is wearing it. I think the prohibition...
So if
couldn't sell
I had this situation, I sat shift for my brother, and my shirt, by mistake, was sent to the cleaner, and the cleaner took it upon herself, seeing a rip in the shirt, to sew it up.
That's amazing.
That's a good cleaner.
That's a good cleaner. I send my shirts to the cleaner. I send my sheets to the cleaners, and I get someone else's shirt.
You know why they sewed it up? Because they probably thought they made the rip. So I remember asking Rabbi Taub about it. He said, it's for a brother, don't worry about it.
Right, that's correct. That's right. Correct. It's only for father.
But the question is, I mean, if it had been for for a pair.
For this, for hearing.
So you didn't sew. First of all, you didn't sew it. Second of all, you didn't ask them to sew it, and they just sewed what they did.
But I might think that in that situation, I shouldn't wear that shirt again.
You might think so.
Maybe, but it was a brother.
No, but still. Well, you might say you could sew it and sell it, maybe, right?
Battery low light is...
It's wearing
it,
or not
you could sew it up and sell it. In those days, they were poor, right? Let's say they got a
shirt. There's a market for used shirts.
Not today, but then again, I bet you there was.
They rewove it like
and there is one
today.
That's why we said if we walk in
stores.
Look, I remember Nebuch, my father was sitting shiva for a sibling, and because his parents were all dead by the time I was born, and he had the shirt. And I remember he used to use it. He kept the shirt and then sewed it up of some sort. He could never really wear it, like working around the house doing shmata stuff. Right? Whoever heard of throwing a shirt out?
That's why I say in those days.
Use it for painting. Use it for right the kinds of things that you wouldn't ruin a good shirt for. So but I don't know. We live in a world where we don't recycle, and of course, A, we don't recycle, and B, the garments in those days were much simpler. Right? You turn it upside down, you won't see the rip. You have a toga.
In Europe, Mr. Bruno told me he was a tailor. In Europe, he had a suit and it was worn out. There's a word for this. They would take the whole suit apart, turn it inside out, and re-sew it. Because
there's a famous little book for children. I think it's a
book a Yiddish word.
How it turns this into something they
take the whole suit, like if the fabric was worn on the outside, take the whole suit apart, turn it inside out.
There's a Yiddish word for that.
Exactly.
And there's no English translation for that.
Well, the Yiddish is you say tzuras gezint. Tzuras gezint.
Right.
You should wear it until it rips out.
Yeah, but they're saying Yiddish word to do this type of turn it inside out.
People weren't rich like us, believe me.
Okay, anyways, back at the ranch. So this is all about Birchas Hashem. Next on the list, Sefer Torah Shnisraf. This is all the bad news kinds of stories. Sefer Torah Shnisraf. So this is about King Yehoiakim. Okay, and Yehoiakim is the son of what's the king who dies in Megiddo? Yoshiyahu.
Yeah.
I think he's the son of Yoshiyahu. And of course, then he's hearing the bad news of impending doom, or actually, according to the way the Gemara understands it, the Yirmiyahu has dictated to Baruch ben Neriah Sofer parts of Eicha. and they bring, and remember the base Mikdash and the country is still existing.
Sure.
Right? And Eicha, chapter 1, 2, and 5, I think, or 1, 2, and 4. It's 1, 2, not 3, and either 4 or 5 are what's being written here that he's reading. And as he reads it, as they read it to him, King Yehoiakim, who refuses to accept the fact that he has to do tshuva and get rid of the idols and so forth, every time he hears something, he just takes a knife and cuts it up and throws it in the fire, cuts off the gvil. Okay, so this is a story that they're really talking about. Once again, it doesn't say exactly what's in the scroll. All we know, the scroll was written by Yirmiyahu, and it's presented and read in front of King Yehoiakim. Excuse me. So Sefer Torah Shnitzraf Minolan Dechsiv, and by the way, so therefore it's not exactly Sefer Torah,
right.
It's Eicha, but it's Kisvei HaKodesh, same thing. It says, Vayhi Kikara Yehudi, this is Yehudi, his sofer, who's reading Shalosh Tlosos V'Arba, he's reading 3 or 4 stanzas, Vayikara B'Tara Sofer. So the king takes the razor, it's the razor blade that they use to cut, that the sofer uses. He obviously, sofer writes on parchment, you need to scratch things out, that's for basic eraser, or maybe cut up the parchment to a square before they finish it. V'ashlech el ha'esh asher el ach. So he threw it into the fire which was in front of them, and how do we know that? We know Kriya is supposed to be done because when the people are there and watching him do this, and of course they're terrified of the king, but they're still supposed to do the right thing because you have a king and you have higher authority. So the pasuk says, "V'lo pachadu," they were not afraid when they saw the king burning the sefer. "V'lo koros bigdeihem," and they didn't rip Kriya. So the Gemara understands this to mean, you'll see the pasuk in about 3 or 4 lines, that they should have done Kriya, that the Yirmiyahu is reading or recording how bad things were. Not only did they read to the king, the Eicha, and the king ripped it off of the parchment and threw it in the fire, but those who were there didn't shudder and didn't rip Kriya. But they should have. So therefore you see that burning a sefer with the Shem Hashem, and like a sefer Torah, whatever it is worthy of Kriya. So this is the story. So the story is really very short. We don't know exactly what is being burnt. We don't know exactly what they should have done, but this is how the Gemara understands it. So my shalosh lossos varba. What does it mean? 3 or 4 stanzas. 3 stanzas of 4. So Amalei Yehoiakim. So they said to Yehoiakim, "Whoa, we got a new scroll. Kasav Yirmiyahu Sefer Kinos. Yirmiyahu wrote Sefer Kinos. Is Eicha, right? The word Kinos means Eicha. So Amalahu, he said to him, Ma Kasav, what does it say in the book of Eicha? What did Yirmiyahu write? Read it to me." So Yehudi, his sofer, says, Eicha Yoshva Badan, right? That's the opening line. They're reading it, right? How the city is solitary. So he's
writing this in advance, of course.
They had the scroll is written. They bring it to the king.
The city was there already there, still there. No?
Correct. So you're right. So it's a nevuah.
Right. Exactly.
The story assumes, right? We read the king Eicha as a dirge, but the story assumes that Yirmiyahu, who's the prophet, is writing this as a nevuah of what will be.
Exactly.
Okay. Many times we have prophecies talk about how things are in the future.
Sure.
Right? They don't say that this will be. They say, I have a vision and I see this about what's going to take place in the future. So, Eicha Yashva Badad, how the city is solitary. So, what's his response? Amalu, Ano Malka. Okay, I'm the king. Okay, the city is solitary, but I'm still in charge. Okay, so they say, Bacho Tivke Balayla. Said they're crying at night, or the city's crying at night. So, what does Yehoiakim said? Ano Malka. I'm still the king. Okay, said Golsa Yehuda Ma'oni. They said Yehuda is going to be exiled from not poverty, but poverty and difficulty. What does he say? Anama, I'm still a king. Okay, they'll be different, but I'm still the king. Didn't touch me. Darach Etzion Avelut. The ways of Zion have become ways of mourning. What do you say? Anamalka. So the Gemara is trying to say that a couple of stanzas were okay, but by the time we got to the 3rd or 4th stanza, it kind of hit home. What happens? So the next line is Hayot Zorel Larosh. Her enemies have become their head, which means you're no longer the head, buddy. Right? The Rosh is no longer you the king. It means Tzoreha, their enemies, their adversaries have become the head. So when the king hears that, he says, oh, that's too much. Because the king is uncaring, the king is uncompassionate, the king doesn't really care except about himself. That's the whole message of this midrash. So he says, Amalei man amra. Okay, he says, who said this? Who has the audacity to say that I'm not going to be king? So they continue reading, Ki Hashem Hoga Arok B'Shoel, because God is Hoga has spoken about most of our sins. Knows God has said this. God is the one who's making this statement, that our enemies will be over you and you'll be nothing. So Miyad, when he heard that, Kodar Kol Askarot Shabbat, he cut out all the names of Hashem that were in the scroll, V'Sarfon, and he burnt Sarfon Ba'esh, and he burnt them in the fire. So in other words, that's why he needed to take the razor, because he razed out all the names of God in Eicha, and he threw them in. So in other words, it wasn't simply haphazard. It was very well premeditated, according to the way the Medrash understands this, according to the Gemara. And this is what happens when he throws them in the fire. And the Tanakh says the people were there, were not afraid, were not fearful. When you see a person throwing God's name into the fire, even if he's a king, you shudder. They didn't. Means they should have been doing Kriya. Okay. So you see, that's for Berachas Hashem. So now the Gemara is a side question.
This is supposed to be for burning a Torah, no?
I'm sorry, not Berachas. Thank you. This was for Sreifa Sefer Torah. This was Sefer Torah. So Amalei Rav Papa Abaye. But something else is going on. Isn't Eicha about bad news?
Yeah.
And isn't this really about saying this is what will take place?
Of course.
So it's not. So maybe they should have done Kriya.
Hearing what's going to happen.
Maybe burning a Sefer Torah is bad, but not bad enough to do Kriya. They should have done Kriya because of the impending doom that's about to be. So and we said that we know that to be true. We learned that of lines above. So were they really bad news? This is years before. There's still time to turn around.
Bad predictions.
In other words, bad predictions is not bad news. Bad predictions say if you don't change, here is where you're headed. Right? It's like a warning by a cop. Right? If you continue driving at this speed, the next time you're really going to get pulled over or write your ticket. That's not bad news. That's just warning you what the consequences will be. So therefore, that's not a reason for doing Kriya. Okay? So this becomes the source for Sefer Torah Shenisraf. Okay? So now the Gemara derives a corollary of this. Amalei Rav Chabal Am Rav Yehuda Hara Sefer Torah Shenikra. You see a Sefer Torah that gets ripped. It's ripped, okay? Shenikra Chayv L'Kroa Shtei Kriyos. Echad Al Gvil V'Echad Al Ksav. You have to do two kriyas, one for the ripping of the parchment and one for the ripping of the ksav. Okay? Because the pasuk goes back and it makes the analogy between kriya and sreifa. It's not. We're extending this a bit because the story continues and it says achrei srofa melchat Megillah v'yetz dvarim, that I guess they didn't do kriya after they saw the king burn the Megillah, the scroll. Because I think at the end of it, the king takes the whole scroll and throws it in, and the words that are there. Okay, so therefore, for destruction of a Sefer Torah, destruction of Shemos Hashem, whether it's burnt or ripped or any other destruction, right? You have to do kriya, do two kriyas.
I wonder again during, the horrible time in Germany and all Europe. I mean, they killed people, so that's a lot worse. But do you think, is there any understanding that when they first burned Torahs, which they did in Kristallnacht or other times, right, that people actually...
With Kriya?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wonder. I'm just, again, nobody knew how bad things would be.
So
right?
I need to imagine that people are reflecting on Kristallnacht, not just about burning of the shul and burning Sefer Torah, about the situation they're in.
No, quite.
So it's Shmos Ross and everything all together, but they are so shell-shocked.
Shmos, like you said, I mean, that's the question, right? So,
right.
When I hear this, or even seeing a Sefer Torah torn, for example, or I guess you see Sefer Torah that are not a puzzle still, they're not usually torn. So I guess that's not as bad as, let's say, if one was accidentally torn. Maybe it could happen, I suppose.
So
that's why you do have one of the scene.
Right. So let's read the next piece of Gemara. There's a clarifier on this. Okay, it's going to talk about tefillin. Rav Abba of Rav Huna Bar Chia have a Yasvik Kamed Rav Abba. So there's Rav Abba and Rav Huna Bar Chia. were sitting in front of Rabbi Abba.
Right.
Okay? So, no, Havayasve. Havayasve Kameh.
Okay, maybe, no?
Havayasve.
There's a margin of those.
Right.
Sorry, Chlema. Come, Rabbi Abba.
Come Rabbi Abba, correct, that makes more sense. Okay, that's the case. So they were sitting. Rabbi Abba and Rabbi Chuna Bar Chia were sitting. Come Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba got up. Boy lifnuye. He wanted to go to the washroom. Okay? And, as you know, when they, in the olden days, when they sat and learned, for most of the day, they would wear the tefillin. Right? So what does he do to go to the bathroom? Takes his tefillin off. So Shakla the Tototfe, he takes off his tefillin, and Achte Abi Sadaya, and he put them on, I think, some kind of shelf. So Asi Bar Namisa, so an ostrich came along, Boy Lemivle, and ostriches, as you know, right, will eat anything. So an ostrich came along, some kind of big bird.
An ostrich is not. An ostrich is like. Is that the Middle East?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Okay, this is
An emu.
Whatever, some bird.
Based on Rashi and Chizkuni.
okay.
What does it say?
It's some big bird. Okay, it's some kind of big bird that sees food and grabs it. Okay, whether it's an ostrich or a different kind of bird, it's less.
Okay, fine.
I don't know.
It says the translation is based on Rashi and Chizkuni to Leviticus 11:16.
Which is about the Yana.
Vayikra, you say?
Yeah.
Which is what? That's what.
Which is about the Yana, I think.
They list all the birds.
Stork.
Stork.
So maybe, I don't know. I don't. Maybe it's a stork. I don't know. Okay.
Whatever it is.
It's some kind of. Here's the bottom line.
Nobody knows what those are.
Correct.
Yeah. So whatever it is.
So whoever it is, Rashi didn't go to the zoo, and the zoo didn't have these kind of rare birds.
That was a big bird.
It's a big bird. Okay, it's not really going to impact on the stuff, but what's clear about the story is this bird is going to swallow the tefillin.
Or try?
Yeah.
Or try, or whatever it's going to do, it's going to destroy the tefillin. And it's not destroy the tefillin, but destroy the parshios inside the tefillin. Okay, right. So boile mivle, so it came to swallow, tried to swallow, it wanted to swallow the tefillin, and obviously, at the last minute, they stopped the bird. So this is like a story that stands out in people's minds. People put tefillin down, and suddenly a big bird comes along and grabs your tefillin.
Not every day you see that.
So Rabbi Abba, who put his tefillin down, said, "Hashto ichayvin li shtei kriyot." Now I would be chayav 2 kriyas if the bird has swallowed. If we hadn't stopped the bird in time, we'd have to do 2 kriyas. One is for the destruction of the parchment, and the other for the destruction of the shemos on the tefillin, on the cloth and the tefillin.
According to the first story with David, should have been only 1 kriya. Should have been only 1 kriya.
No, the Gemara said a moment before that there are 2. If you see a Sefer Torah that's ripped, you do 2 because the Acharei Sorah from Melchat the Megillah v'Tadvarim. Okay. So there's a story. The story is a standalone story. So Amalei Minalach. So the other guy, Rav Huna Bar Chia, says, Rav Abba, how do you know that you have to do 2 kriyas? So he says, Ha. It says Ha b'didiha.
Oh, no, that first
How do you know this and this 2 kriyas? So he said, because b'didi havi uvda, because I had the same story where I took my tefillin off once as the other guy, and Big Bird came along and wanted to eat my tefillin, or maybe they did eat my tefillin. Right? I lost my tefillin. This really happened, so to speak. V'asar l'kamei d'Rav Masna, v'lo have biyadi, and v'lo have biyadi. So I came to Rav Masna to ask a shaila, do I have to do kriya? And he didn't have an answer for me. So asar l'kamei d'Rav Yehuda. I went to Rav Yehuda. It's not Rabbi Yehuda the Amora, big Amora. So Amalei said to me, Hachi Amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel says. Go back to the beginning of time of Amoraim. Lo Amra el bezroa u'kamaisa shahaya. This only happens when it's done with force, and like the story of Yehoiakim. In other words, if you have tefillin, if Shem Hashem and the Sefer Torah gets destroyed accidentally, right, so you don't have to do kriya. It's only where you see the intentional destruction of the Sefer Torah with impunity, right, with lahachas, that's when you do kriya. And that makes sense.
So the beginning of our statement, shenikra, means again when it's intentionally, not if you happen to see us.
Right. So the clarifier on all of this Because in the case of Kristallnacht, this was done wantonly.
Absolutely.
Okay, but in the case of, for example, I don't know.
Well, like you say, Hagba, something that tears. Who knows? I mean, anything could happen.
Yeah.
That's not intentional. The tear is not intentional.
Correct.
It's accidental.
So in that case, you would not, because
Right,
it's an
that's what I'm
accident, you would
saying.
not have to do
You
Kriya.
wouldn't have to do
Right,
Kriya.
correct.
If it's shul accidentally.
Correct. It also, by the way, means that if a person did it intentionally, they only rip the parchment, they do one kriya. If they intentionally rip the parchment and the letters, right? It's actually not the person that's doing it. If you're watching it, right? It's not the ripper himself. He goes to a different place, but you have to do kriya.
But a lot of people could be watching it, of course.
Yes, of course. Correct.
Chas v'shalom, which should happen in shul.
That's what I'm saying.
Everybody would have to do Kriya.
Right. By the way, I don't believe that the Gemara actually talks about Sefer Torah that falls.
No.
About fasting. I don't believe the Gemara talks about that. It's later. It's learned really from this Gemara here that you see where the Torah is treated with disrespect. You do Kriya, so we don't say Kriya, but it's a bad sign. Therefore, people fast. Okay, and on that there's all kinds of exemptions. If it happens when you can't fast, if it happens when you don't say okay, give tzedakah and opposed to
But
fasting.
if a Russia walks into the door and goes open and rips the Sefer Torah, everyone in the shul would have to do Kriya twice.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Very
Everyone would
right.
have to do Kriya twice, and I assume the fasting the whole day.
I thought we do Hagba. When you do Hagba, you line up the seam.
Yes.
I think you do it that way, so if it rips, it doesn't rip.
So you do it because
the
that's
cloth
actually
doesn't rip,
right.
but the seam rips.
So I don't know if we do it really not to rip it. It just makes a lot of sense.
If something were to happen,
It's actually it's putting it where the stress is supposed to be. So when you do Kriya, you do Hagba, and you're putting stress on pulling the parchment apart, you want the seam in the middle so that the forces are equally distributed. And they all focus on that seam in the middle, as opposed to if you don't have it, then the force is all over the parchment, and that's where it can rip. See, right? You are saying you're saying it a different way. I'm saying it's not really just to prevent the kriya. It's the way to do it because that's the best way for the Sefer Torah. Okay. That's Sefer Torah. Sefer Torah be treated with respect, right?
Given the seam,
right? I mean, yeah. Correct. So and so forth.
And from here, we must also learn that even in the days of Shmuel, they knew about this, like right at the very, very beginning.
About the ostrich or about doing kriya?
Or doing kriya.
Yeah. Yes. Well, actually, it's the Gemara. The Gemara says it's a brisa. It says Sefer Torah Shenisraf. So it's a brisa from the days of Tanoim. The Gemara's discussion is how you know it from. Where do you know it from? Where's the source of it? The Gemara says it goes back to the case of El Yochim. It's not a bad. It's by the way, of all the limudim on the page, of all the drushes, this one makes sense.
Yeah, this one makes perfect.
Right. Except the only thing you can argue is that when it says they didn't do kriya, maybe it's telling us they don't do kriya. But the impression here is what's going on is really bad. Right? The impression when David HaMelech does kriya for Shaul and Yonatan, everybody does the right thing by doing kriya. Here, it's such a bad incident, right? Especially when you assign kinnas or echa to the scroll that's being read. So it makes sense that what they're doing is inappropriate. Therefore, they should have done kriya.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that they mentioned they didn't do it seems to imply that
Who's
they
this
should.
guy, Rav Masna, who didn't know what the right halacha was?
No, it's not even how many times do ostriches come along, right? In other words, if you would have simply read the story of Yoakim, you could have said at any time a Sefer Torah is burnt. You would not know this exemption.
That's true.
So he probably said, "Look, I don't think you really have to do it, but I can't prove it to you." And then the next one is Shmuel says, "I have a tradition. It's only the case that happened. We learn it from the case, and that's the case which was done by Bizroa, Ukushmai Sishaya." Okay. Next event, I think it's the last in the series here, and that's about Yehuda, Ari Yehuda, and Mikdash Yerushalayim. Okay. So and that you have to do kriya for it. How do you know this? This becomes a little bit more difficult to find in Tanakh, because Tanakh deals mostly with a time,
city in Yehuda,
mostly a time before the destruction of Churban Abayis.
Sure.
So actually, it's found in the end of Yirmiyahu. This is when Gedaliah has been assassinated.
Right.
Okay, this is after Churban Abayis. All right. And Gedaliah was put in place. Gedaliah is assassinated. A group of people come along. It was assassinated by Yishmael ben whoever it was.
The
Okay,
group got together.
right. So another group comes along, and it's not clear why they're coming, but you'll see that they have done kriya. Remember, the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, so you see the people did Kriya for the Beis Hamikdash. They seem to be going to Makoma Beis Hamikdash of some sort. Maybe they're bringing something in the place on Harabayas. It's not clear from the story, but they're doing Kriya. And actually, this group, the story is not told here, but this group are ambushed, and the group themselves are killed, because the conspirators who killed Gedaliah, right, and wanted to take control, wanted to hide what they had done. Yeah. So the poor group that we're about to read about did not really have a happy ending. They were killed and thrown in some kind of mass pit.
Yeah, but you mentioned like Kriya. If it's first of all Harabai, it's not just Arei Yehuda, but the famous story that Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi what's his name, they go see the BAYT after, and they see the fox going through, and it doesn't say they did Kriya. They're right there, right? So I don't remember it saying
because they had done Kriya. The Kriya was done.
Well, you only do it once, you mean?
Yeah,
I don't know.
When you go to Harabayit. All right, so here's the case. So Ari Yehuda Minala, Dechsev Vayavo Anashim Mishchem Mishilo Misham, and Gedaliah is killed. Nobody knows about the conspirators are there, and suddenly these guys show up. Where are they coming from? From Shechem, from Shiloh and Mishomron. Shmonim Ish, there's 80 people. Magul Chezakan, they got beards that are cut. I'm not sure if that means that's a sign of mourning. Krue Begadim, they are definitely ripped clothing. That's definitely a sign of mourning. They cut themselves. Right. This sounds very antinomian, but it's obviously a sign of mourning that they're going through.
You can't do that.
I agree. Okay, so this is just a story. Okay.
I agree.
So they mincha levanom biyadam lahavi beis Hashem, and they have with them some kind of mincha and some kind of frankincense they want to bring to beis Hashem. Okay, now it's not clear where are they going. Right? Do these guys not know the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? Are they know something's happened? Or did they come from the cities which were destroyed and they thought the Beis Hamikdash is still there? Was the Beis Hamikdash still there? Could they go up to Harabayit? But at any rate, this is the source that you see that these people were coming Krui Begadim.
Where's this story? Do we know where
Yirmiyahu 41.
Well, this is Yirmiyahu 41.
Yirmiyahu 40. The end of the Sefer Yirmiyahu. This is after. This is the assassination of Gedaliah, which is this is really the tail end. This is the last chapters of Yirmiyahu, and
Mem Aleph, it says here.
Yeah, it's Mem Aleph. Okay.
I'm going to have to look it up now.
Correct. Yishmael ben Netanya and 10 people killed Gedaliah ben Achikam on the 7th month, which is of course Rosh Hashanah, right? We by the way, people think they was killed on Rosh Hashanah. We fast on Gedaliah on the 3rd because they couldn't fast on Rosh Hashanah, and they kill him. They kill him who had been put by the king of Bavel over control of the land, and nobody knew. Second day, nobody knew about it. Perfect conspiracy. However, unfortunately, all these, someone steps on the scene. Yishmael ben Netanya lekrosim en mitzvah. So Yishmael goes out from mitzvah to greet them. Holech holoch uvocher. He's crying. Maybe crying. He's not clear why he's crying. When he meets them, he says, "Come to Gedaliah ben Achikam."
It's a
trap.
He's faking
it's a trap. I know it's a trap. Okay.
He knows it.
Okay. And there were 10 people who said to him, "Don't kill us, Altamitenu, ki yesh lanu matmonim basada." Ooh, we have riches in the field. The old trick: if you save us, we will bring you our riches. And they didn't kill them, and they were the ones who, of course, got out the news about the death of Gedaliah and what was going on, etc., etc. And then, of course, the Run comes and chases everybody out. But the point is that they hadn't gone to the city yet, so they weren't doing Kriya Yerushalayim. They're outside the city. The Kriya that they're doing is understood in the story because they were coming from Shechem and Shiloh and Shomron, and they saw the destruction of the country. So this is Arei Yehuda. Okay, that's the source for it. And now the Gemara.
Shomron, well, that's a separate issue.
Well,
Shomron really wasn't in Yehuda at all. Right? It's
So
part of the old kingdom, the northern kingdom.
yes, it's I guess Ari Yehuda and Shomron maybe.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Vayavo. Okay, so that's a story. So Amar Rav Chalva, Amar Ula Bira, Amar Rav Elazar Hara, Ari Yehuda b'Churbanim Omer, Ari Kachcha Hayu Midbar. The Korea. You make the statement, your holy cities were now desolate, and you rip Korea. When you see Yerushalayim b'Churbanah, you say Tzion Midbar Haita, Yerushalayim Shemema. So it's a pasuk one from Yeshayahu. Tzion has become a midbar, Yerushalayim has become desolate, and you rip Korea. Beis Hamikdash b'Churbanah Omer. You see the Beis Hamikdash destroys it. Beis Koshem v'Tevarteno asher hilalucha avoteno hayula sreifat eish v'kol machmadeno hayula charva. All our beauty was to destroy. V'Korea, and you do Korea itself. Okay. Good. Let's just do, well, we have 5 minutes anyway. I want to get to the bottom of the page. The Gemara simply adds that we had learned that you do one Kriya and then you do an additional Kriya, right? The Brisa said, if you see Ari Yehuda in the Mikdash, Yerushalayim, you do one Kriya in the Mikdash, and then you add, for Yerushalayim, you add a little more. So the Gemara learns out that's only if it happens in this order. You come to Yerushalayim first, you did Kriya, right. And then you see that you come to the Mikdash and you do Kriya, and then you come to the city and you see it's destroyed, and then you go to the others, Arei Yehuda, and you do more Kriya. So, what about the other way around? So Gemara says it's not true, because each one is an increasing level of sadness. Each one gets its own separate Kriya. If you ripped on the base of Mikdash, it can't be any greater sadness than that. So you kind of do an additional Kriya. You do an additional extension of Kriya, but if it's the other way around, it's a separate Kriya.
But that doesn't happen with any of the other Kriyas, right? Like Nasi and Avedin and Sefer Torah.
Correct. So the Gemara actually will say that's true, but the Gemara says, for example, if you're sitting Shiva, and during the Shiva you hear about another death, you take the Kriya and extend it. But it would not be for a parent. For a parent, you would have to do a new Kriya itself. So that, because once again, that's a bump up or bump down, right. Whichever way you're bumping, it's in the level of sadness. So right, for one equal relative, not a parent to another parent, or from a parent to another relative, you would simply extend the Kriya. So the concept exists the same way from personal level.
Rabbi, halacha l'maaseh. Some of these things, there is no nasi and all these things.
Correct, that's right.
But we come to Israel today, and there are destroyed cities,
correct.
And there are areas that we see.
Yeah.
So do people practically?
So
I'm saying
they're actually supposed.
This is real stuff for today.
Right. So they're actually really supposed to do it. Many people do not. They're actually really supposed. So let me just finish one line. I'll tell you practical, okay? Because I want to get to the end of this. So the Gemara says, Korea Mikdash Moshe Yerushalayim v'Ramenu Echad Shmei v'Echarab Kemeshigel at Sofim Korea. When you get to Har Sofim, which is of course Mount Scopus, where Hebrew University is, you do Kriya. The Korea Mikdash b'fnei Atzmo v'Yerushalayim b'fnei Atzmo, and then you rip separately for Beis Mikdash and separately for Yerushalayim. So this Brisa that we're asking now says you're doing two Kriyas. The Brisa we started with said you do one Kriya and you add to it. Question: Lo kasha had the paga b'Mikdash b'Reisha, had the paga b'Yerushalayim b'Reisha.
Sure.
Okay, so what depends. If you see the Beis Mikdash, then Yerushalayim afterwards, right? Now, the only question I have about the Gemara is the way I can understand it. The only way that you'd see the Beis Hamikdash before you see Yerushalayim would seem to me to be coming from Har Sofim.
Right.
Right. But think of Yerushalayim as a much smaller city, the old city. When you look at Har Sofim, you come down. You see first you get to the Beis Hamikdash. You got to then get beyond that to see Yerushalayim, the old city. So, but the Gemara seems to say from Har Sofim you'd see first Yerushalayim and then Beis Hamikdash separately. I don't know. So the Rishonim suggests it's possible it happened. Maybe a person was transported in some kind of cart, some kind of closed-in stagecoach.
Right, yeah, the litter, yeah.
So they open the litter and he's in the Makom Beis Hamikdash at the Kotel. Then after there they take him out the city, sees the rest of the city. I think it's possible. Sure. Practically speaking, today there is there is a minhag that on Rosh Chodesh and on Erev Shabbos after Chatzos, people don't do Kriya if they haven't been there for 30 days to the Rabbi, to the Kotel. Nobody really knows where that source actually comes from. There's really no source for it. Okay, when the poskim write about, they say we don't know where it comes from, but this is Minhag Yisrael, so it's got to be okay. There are two parts. One is about Arei Yehuda and Yerushalayim, and the other is about the Beis Hamikdash. Arei Yehuda, surely nobody does Kriya because we don't really know what's Arei Yehuda. what was, what wasn't, even though Hebron.
Archaeologists now
true. Then the other part about Yerushalayim and Orei Yehuda is, when do you really see Yerushalayim? When would you do Kriya? I found once a heter. It's a very shaky kind of heter, but I'll tell you anyway. And if you're wearing someone else's shirt, right, someone else's garment, then you don't really have permission to rip his garment. Okay,
some people switch shirts.
So either they switch shirts, or if you really want to get sketchy, okay, right, then you actually buy the guy's shirt. You sell your shirt to the other guy.
Sell to each other again.
They sell to each other. That's kind of real, right, around the law, but that's about the closest I can really find to anyone that says you shouldn't do it. People tend to be less and less concerned about it. The people in Yerushalayim, the minhag Yerushalayim is that people in Yerushalayim don't do Kriya, even if they have not been to the Kotel within 30 days. You know what?
Busy on clothes.
No one knows why. Once again, it's Minhag Yisrael, Minchag Yisrael, that this is how they've done it for years. There was always, I won't say there was always, but mostly there was a community in Yerushalayim.
Sure.
And they said, this is the tradition.
There was always
so we never have to run.
Because otherwise you'd never go, because you'd rather the shirts.
Well, whatever it is, okay? So that's,
I didn't know about this rule a few weeks ago.
Okay. So, right, I don't know. So maybe the part about Erev Shabbos is the concern was if you ripped your garment on Erev Shabbos, you wouldn't have another garment to wear. Maybe the source. Nobody really knows. Anyway, so the bottom line is really, you probably should do Kriya. If you go to the Kotel, you will see few people doing it. And most of these people have not been there every 30 days. For sure, if you're there within 30 days, you don't have to do Kriya, right? But the minhag has kind of, unfortunately, fallen into more disuse than use. Probably because, practically speaking, people are more, people come and come, right?
The yeshiva bachrim are very machmir on this.
Yes,
to do this.
Yeah, because the parents.
But they probably bring, and they probably bring the same shirt that they have.
I was going to say,
And they do Kriya. That's right. Yes, I know.
Because otherwise,
they do it on the same shirt.
Parents are paying for the shirts.
No,
I
seriously, you wouldn't tear a
shirt.
shirt every few weeks or every whatever, every month, a month and a half to tear a shirt. Come on.
Right.
But I know my kids when they were at yeshiva in Yerushalayim, they're very concerned. They have this all down pat.
But as long as they keep the same shirt, no problem.
And the rebbeim at the yeshiva.
Right, because you want us to think there's really. The fact that people don't do it doesn't mean that there's really a heter not to do it. Really, right? We kind of celebrate. We celebrate the fact that we have Yerushalayim.
Absolutely.
In fact, there was a whole argument when Yerushalayim was reconquered in '67. Do we toss out Nachem?
Right.
We get rid of that. The answer is we don't get rid of it, and we don't get rid of the Kriya, because the reality is Yerushalayim is a Churban. The base of Mikdash is surely a Churban.
For sure.
But they're playing soccer on the Temple Mount. You can't play soccer.
That's only because we gave them jurisdiction.
Whatever, but that's exactly part. That's part of the Avelus that we gave them jurisdiction, and that does not look like it's going to change in the short time.